evaluating the after-tax returns Berkshire earns on its acquisitions of non-insurance businesses, whether it be the utilities, the railroad, or the manufacturing, service, and retailing business, in terms of choosing a benchmark, what would be your best estimate of the returns on acquisitions earned by an aggregate of all American industry, adjusted, of course, to exclude the impact of accounting write-offs and equalizing for leverage?
It sounds too tough for me, but go ahead, Charlie, and I'll be thinking.
Well, let me summarize. I think the sum total of all acquisitions done by American industry will be lousy. It's in the nature of corporations that are prosperous to be talked into dumb deals. And bureaucracy tends to feed on itself and create unnecessary costs. So I think the history of acquisitions is that it's not an enormous way to wealth. Now, it has been for us, but we're very peculiar. And luckily, a lot of people don't want to be peculiar in our way.
Yeah, it's really hard to, come up with a useful answer on that. But I certainly.
But you don't have a great deal of optimism, do you?
When we read that a company we don't control is going to make an acquisition, I'm much more inclined to cry than to smile. I mean, but on the other way, we love making acquisitions ourselves, so it's a little hard to get too harsh just because we don't like the other guy's acquisitions. I have sat in on probably hundreds of acquisition discussions conducted by people I didn't control, so as a director, and most of them have been bad ideas, but there have been
some of them are mediocre.
Some are good. Well, a great case is Geico. I mean, it's really a great case study because Geico had this wonderful business prior to going off the tracks in the early 1970s, but it'd been an incredible business, and everybody, it was well known in the financial world. And then it went off the tracks in its own business, got back on the tracks, and then after it got back on the tracks, it made a couple of acquisitions, and they weren't disasters, but they certainly weren't successes, and they tended to take I think they took their eyes off the ball in terms of the potential of Geico itself. So the accounting costs of those, there were two acquisitions in particular, the accounting cost of those two acquisitions was poor, but it wasn't disastrous. But if you look to secondary effects, it was huge. I mean, there were a dozen years there or so where all kinds of gains could have been made that weren't, and you don't get those years back. Now, that was probably a net plus for Berkshire, in the end, because we'd bought half of the company, then we got to buy the other half later on. If they'd done wonderfully, we probably would have never bought the second half. Now, maybe the first half would have been worth that much more, but it's human nature to some degree to keep wanting to. I mean, normally the people who get to be CEOs are not shrinking violets, and they have animal spirits, as Keynes talked about, and they like to do things. And the supporting staff certainly senses that they like to do things. I mean, they often have people in charge of strategy or acquisitions or all of that thing. What do you think those people are going to do? Sit around and suck their thumbs? No, they're going to keep coming in with deals. And the investment bankers will be, calling on them daily. So there are all these forces that push toward deals, and if you try to push toward deals, you're going to get a lot of dumb deals. We try very hard, Charlie and I, not to get eager to do a deal. We're just eager to do a deal that makes sense, and that would be a lot harder if we had directors, strategy departments, whatever it might be, all pushing us toward, what have you done in the last 3 months or something of the sort. So the setting in which you operate really can be very important. Charlie, any further?
No, but you know how much more tactful he is.
Yeah, well, the comparison isn't tough.